In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. You've heard this phrase countless times if you've spent any time in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It's become something of a meme, a catchphrase that defines an entire setting. But behind that simple statement lies a truth far more horrifying than most people realize. The Imperium of man, humanity's last bastion against the darkness, commits atrocities on a scale that would make history's worst tyrants look like amateur hour. These aren't the crimes of mustache-twirling villains or cackling chaos worshippers. These are the calculated, systematic horrors perpetrated by the supposed good guys, the defenders of humanity, all in the name of survival. The Imperium spans 1 million worlds, encompasses quadrillions of human souls, and has endured for 10,000 years since the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne. It has survived the Horus Heresy, the Age of Apostasy, the War of the Beast, and countless other catastrophes that would have shattered lesser civilizations. But survival has come at a cost, measured not just in lives lost, but in souls destroyed, in innocence obliterated, in the slow erosion of everything that once made humanity worth saving. The Imperium has become a machine that grinds up human lives to fuel its continued existence, a nightmare state that would horrify the Emperor himself if he could still speak. What makes the Imperium's crimes particularly chilling is that many of them are committed not out of malice, but out of a twisted sense of necessity. The defenders of these atrocities will tell you about the horrors of chaos, the ravenous hunger of the Tyranids, the cold calculation of the Necrons, the pitiless cruelty of the Dark Eldar. They'll explain how the galaxy is so dark, so hostile, so utterly unforgiving, that humanity must become monsters to survive among monsters. And there's a kernel of truth to this. The threats facing humanity in the 41st millennium are real and existential. But somewhere along the line, the Imperium crossed over from doing terrible things when necessary to doing terrible things as standard operating procedure. It became the very thing it claimed to fight against, a force of annihilation and oppression that destroys more human lives than it saves. The real horror of the Imperium isn't that it commits these crimes, it's that it has normalized them. Planetary genocide is a policy decision. Turning criminals into lobotomized cyborg slaves is an accepted form of justice. Sacrificing thousands of psychic children every single day to keep a corpse god alive is considered the price of doing business. Child soldiers, mass torture, religious persecution, the destruction of knowledge, the institutionalization of suffering across countless worlds. All of this is simply how things are done. There's no debate, no moral questioning, no soul-searching about whether these methods are justified. The Imperium has created a culture where cruelty is virtue, where mercy is weakness, and where the systematic destruction of human potential is celebrated as pragmatism. As we journey through the darkest chambers of imperial policy, we'll examine the specific crimes that define this nightmare empire. We'll look at how Exterminatus reduces entire worlds to lifeless rocks. We'll explore the horror of the Servitor program, where human beings are stripped of their consciousness and turned into biological machines. We'll witness the daily sacrifice that keeps the Emperor alive and the Astronomicon burning. We'll see how children are taken from their homes and transformed into superhuman warriors, with the majority dying screaming in the process. We'll encounter the walking nightmares of penitent engines and archoflagellants, punishments so severe that death would be a mercy. We'll examine the Inquisition's reign of terror, where accusation is equivalent to guilt, and entire worlds burn on the word of a single person. We'll confront the Imperium's policy of xenocide, the automatic extermination of any alien species regardless of whether they pose a threat. And we'll understand how all of these crimes feed into each other, creating a spiral of darkness that can never be escaped. The defenders of the Imperium will tell you that every one of these crimes is necessary, that without them, humanity would fall to chaos or be devoured by the Xenos. They'll paint a picture of a species with its back against the wall, forced to make impossible choices in an impossible situation. But as we examine each atrocity in detail, we'll see a different truth emerge. Many of these crimes aren't responses to external threats at all. They're the products of an empire that has lost its way, that has forgotten what it was fighting for, that has become so consumed with survival that it has sacrificed its soul. The Imperium doesn't commit these crimes to save humanity. It commits them because it has become a machine that can only perpetuate itself through the consumption of human lives and the destruction of human potential. This isn't a story with heroes and villains. It's a tragedy on a galactic scale, a cautionary tale about what happens when survival becomes the only virtue and when the ends are always used to justify the means. The Imperium of Man is humanity's greatest accomplishment and its greatest shame, a monument to both our capacity for resilience and our capacity for cruelty. So let's descend into the darkness together. Let's examine the crimes that the Imperium commits not despite its claim to protect humanity, but because of it. Let's understand how the defenders of mankind became the greatest threat to human dignity, freedom, and life itself. Exterminatus. When planetary genocide becomes policy. Picture a world, not an abstract concept, but a living, breathing planet, with cities that have stood for centuries, forests where children play, oceans where fishermen work, mountains that have been sacred to the people, below for thousands of years. Now imagine that world burning, not just a city or a region, but the entire surface of the planet consumed by nuclear fire, or devoured by world-eating viruses, or torn apart by weapons that crack the very crust and expose the molten core beneath. This is Exterminatus, and it represents perhaps the most visible and dramatic of the Imperium's crimes against humanity itself. The word Exterminatus comes from High Gothic and means exactly what you think it means: complete and utter extermination. It's the order given when the highest authorities of the Imperium have decided that a planet is beyond saving, that the only solution is to destroy the entire biosphere and render the world lifeless for millennia to come. The official justification is always couched in terms of necessity. A world has fallen to chaos corruption so severe that it cannot be cleansed. A tyrannid infestation has taken root and will only grow stronger. A genestealer cult has subverted the population beyond any hope of redemption. The Xenos hold it, and the cost of retaking it would be too high. These are the reasons given, the rationalizations offered to explain why billions of human lives must be snuffed out in an instant. But let's be clear about what Exterminatus actually means in practical terms. It means that every man, woman, and child on that planet dies. The factory worker who gets up every day to build munitions for the Imperial war machine, the farmer who tends crops to feed other Imperial worlds, the mother teaching her children to pray to the Emperor, the soldier who fought against the invaders until the last possible moment, all of them burned together. There is no evacuation, no attempt to separate the innocent from the guilty, no trial or investigation or second opinion. An inquisitor, a chapter master, or another high-ranking official makes the call, and entire civilizations are erased from existence. The methods of Exterminatus are as varied as they are horrifying, each one a testament to humanity's capacity for destruction. The most common method involves cyclonic torpedoes, massive warheads that detonate deep within a planet's surface, causing chain reactions that crack the crust and destabilize the core. The resulting earthquakes and volcanic eruptions are enough to kill everything on the surface. But that's not where it ends. The atmosphere itself ignites, burning away into the void and leaving behind a dead rock floating in space. Those who don't die immediately in the initial blast are killed by the shockwaves, and those who survive that suffocate as their planet's air disappears. Then there are the virus bombs, weapons so terrible that their use is considered extreme, even by Exterminatus standards. These devices release the Life-Eater virus, a pathogen engineered during the dark age of technology, or perhaps even before. The virus spreads across a planet's surface at incredible speed, consuming all organic matter it touches. Everything with cells, from the largest beasts to the smallest microorganisms, is reduced to an organic sludge. The people die screaming as their bodies literally dissolve from the inside out. But the horror doesn't end there. When all the organic matter has been consumed, the resulting chemical breakdown releases flammable gases across the entire planet. These gases are then ignited by orbital bombardment, creating a firestorm that can be seen from space, a final apocalyptic blaze that scorches the surface and melts it to glass. Some exterminatus actions use atmospheric incinerator torpedoes, which burst in low planetary orbit and literally ignite all oxygen in the atmosphere. The entire planet becomes a bonfire, and everything on the surface burns simultaneously. Imagine being on that world. One moment you're going about your day, and the next the sky itself is on fire. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The very air ignites and you die with everyone you've ever known, everything you've ever seen, every place you've ever been. The historical records tell us that planets subjected to this method can burn for months, glowing like pieces of amber in the darkness of space. The truly terrifying thing about exterminatus isn't just that it happens, but how often it happens and how casually it's employed. While the exact numbers are unknown, estimates suggest that dozens, if not hundreds of worlds have been subjected to exterminatus over the Imperium's 10,000-year history. Some sources suggest the number could be in the thousands. Think about that for a moment. Not individual people, not cities or nations, but entire worlds destroyed, each one representing billions of lives, centuries or millennia of history, cultures and traditions and knowledge that can never be recovered. All of it reduced to nothing because someone with the authority to do so decided it was necessary. And here's where the true crime becomes apparent. Exterminatus isn't just used on worlds that have truly fallen beyond redemption. It's used on worlds where the fighting is too difficult, where the casualties would be too high, where the time investment would be too long. It's used as a strategic decision, a cost-benefit analysis where billions of human lives are weighed against military resources and found wanting. An inquisitor might order exterminatus because they suspect chaos taint, even if most of the population is loyal. A chapter master might do it to deny resources to the enemy. A Lord Admiral might do it simply because reconquering the world would take too long and they have other objectives to pursue. The case of Typhon Primaris illustrates this perfectly. The world was invaded by chaos forces during the Plague Wars, and yes, significant portions of the population had been corrupted. But there were still millions of loyal imperial citizens fighting desperately against the invaders, soldiers and civilians alike, who remained true to the emperor even as their world burned around them. The Inquisition's response? Exterminatus. Every loyal citizen who had fought and bled to defend their world died alongside the traitors they had been fighting. Their reward for loyalty was to be burned alive by the very Imperium they had been trying to protect. Or consider the world of Medusa IV, destroyed during a massive campaign that saw multiple factions converging on the planet. The Imperium held significant portions of the world, had troops on the ground, and was actively engaged in combat operations. But when it became clear that the world would fall to chaos forces, despite the Imperium's efforts, the decision was made to destroy it rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Thousands upon thousands of Imperial Guard soldiers, fighting men and women who had been promised reinforcement and support, were incinerated alongside the enemy. They died not in glorious battle, but in a blinding flash of nuclear fire, killed by their own side to deny the enemy a prize. The defenders of this policy will point to worlds like Istvan III, where the virus bombing was necessary to purge traitor elements at the start of the Horus heresy. They'll cite cases where tyrannid invasions or demonic incursions truly did leave no other option. And in some cases, they might even be right. There are worlds where the corruption runs so deep, where the Xenos threat is so overwhelming that conventional reconquest would be impossible or would cost even more lives in the long run. But these cases are the exceptions, not the rule. More often, exterminatus is used not because it's the only option, but because it's the easiest one. It's faster to destroy a world than to save it. It's cheaper to crack a planet open than to commit the military forces necessary for reconquest. It's simpler to kill everyone than to separate the innocent from the guilty. What makes this even more damning is that the authority to order exterminatus is held by relatively few individuals, and there's virtually no oversight or accountability. An inquisitor can order a world destroyed on their own authority, answerable to no one but other inquisitors who might or might not agree with the decision after the fact. A Space Marine chapter. Master can do the same if they deem it necessary for their mission. There's no committee, no review board, no democratic process. One person makes the decision, and billions die. And if that decision turns out to be wrong, if it later emerges that the threat could have been contained or that the intelligence was faulty, there are no consequences. The planet is already dead, and there's no bringing it back. Even when there are consequences, they're often minor. The Ordo Excorium, an order of the Inquisition specifically dedicated to managing exterminatus actions, has stripped some inquisitors of rank for inappropriate use of the sanction. But these cases are rare and usually involve only the most egregious examples of trigger happiness. An inquisitor who destroys one planet without sufficient justification might face censure. An inquisitor who destroys multiple planets gets a reputation as a hardliner, but continues to operate with full authority. The system actively rewards those willing to pull the trigger, because a destroyed world can't spread corruption or rebellion, and dead populations don't require ongoing management. The psychological impact on those who carry out exterminatus orders is another layer of horror that's often overlooked. The naval crews who launch the torpedoes, the bombardment officers who calculate the firing solutions, the captains who give the order to fire, these are people who must live with the knowledge that they've killed billions of human beings. Some Space Marines undergo mind wipes after participating in exterminatus operations, specifically to preserve their sanity. They literally have the memories removed because the human psyche, even an augmented transhuman one, cannot process the magnitude of what they've done and remain functional. But perhaps the most damning aspect of exterminatus is what it represents philosophically. It's a declaration that human life has no inherent value, that people exist only to serve the Imperium and can be discarded the moment they become inconvenient. Every single person on those destroyed worlds was a thinking, feeling individual with hopes and dreams and loved ones. They had stories, had potential, had value beyond their utility to the Imperial war machine. And all of that was deemed irrelevant. They became numbers in a casualty report, a footnote in Imperial history, collateral damage in the never-ending war for survival. The tragedy is that exterminatus creates the very problems it's meant to solve. When worlds see their neighbors destroyed, when populations learn that the Imperium will kill them rather than help them, it breeds the desperation and resentment that feeds chaos, corruption, and rebel movements. Why remain loyal to an Imperium that might kill you tomorrow? Why fight for a regime that sees you as disposable? The policy of planetary destruction doesn't make the Imperium stronger. It makes it more fragile, more dependent on fear and terror, more likely to face the very threats it's trying to eliminate. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of violence that can never be broken because the Imperium has committed itself to a philosophy where mercy is weakness and every problem looks like a target for orbital bombardment. And so the planets burn, dozens every year, perhaps hundreds across the galaxy's countless sectors. Each one a civilization snuffed out, a piece of human potential obliterated, a crime against humanity committed by humanity itself in the name of protecting humanity. The ashes of those worlds drift through space, eternal monuments to the Imperium's willingness to destroy what it cannot save. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Imperium, another Inquisitor is looking at another world and calculating whether the population is worth the trouble of saving. The answer, more often than not, is no. The Servitor Program, turning humans into living machines. Walk into any Imperial facility and you'll see them. Shambling figures with vacant eyes and mechanical limbs, performing repetitive tasks with mindless efficiency. They might be cleaning corridors, operating machinery, performing calculations, or standing guard with integrated weapons. These are servitors, and they represent one of the Imperium's most widespread and normalized atrocities: the systematic lobotomization and cyberization of human beings to create biological machines. The official explanation for servitors is technological necessity, the Imperium's prohibition against true artificial intelligence, stemming from the catastrophic cybernetic revolts of the Age of Strife, means that machine spirits and human-machine hybrids fill the role that AI would play in other civilizations. Rather than build robots with true intelligence, the Adeptus Mechanicus creates servitors by taking human brains, wiping away their personality and higher functions, and reprogramming them to perform specific tasks. It's presented as a practical solution to a technical problem, a way to have automated labor without risking another AI uprising. But this clinical explanation masks a horror that should shock anyone with a shred of humanity. Let's understand what being made into a servitor actually means. First, you're lobotomized. Not a careful, surgical removal of specific brain functions, but a crude process that destroys your prefrontal cortex, eliminating everything that makes you a person: your memories, your personality, your ability to reason and feel and hope. All of it is burned away or suppressed until nothing remains but the most basic autonomic functions. Then comes the surgery. Your arms might be replaced with mechanical tools or weapons. Your legs might be removed entirely, and your torso mounted on a tracked or wheeled base. Tubes are inserted into your body for feeding and waste removal. Ports are drilled into your skull for direct data input. Chemical regulators are grafted onto your spine to keep your body functioning despite the trauma. When the process is complete, you're no longer a person. You're a thing, a biological component in a machine, kept technically alive, but stripped of everything that made life worth living. The scale of the Servitor program is staggering. On the forge worlds of the Mechanicus, servitors outnumber regular humans by orders of magnitude. Mars alone, the red planet at the heart of the Mechanicus, is estimated to have servitors numbering in the billions. Every single one of those billions was once a person, and now they're mindless drones shuffling through their programmed routines until their bodies give out. Across the entire Imperium, spanning its million worlds, the number of servitors easily reaches into the trillions. It's one of the most common sights in the Imperium, so ubiquitous that most Imperial citizens don't give them a second thought. They're just part of the background, like furniture or equipment. Where do these servitors come from? The answer reveals another layer of horror. Many servitors are vat-grown, engineered from human genetic material, but never allowed to develop true consciousness. These are arguably the ethical servitors, if such a term can apply to any part of this process, because they never knew what they were missing. They were created specifically to be servitors and never experienced personhood. But a significant portion of servitors, some sources suggest as many as 30 to 40%, were once real people with real lives. These are the criminal servitors, individuals who ran afoul of imperial law and were sentenced to servitude in perpetuis by the Adeptus Arbites. The crimes that can result in servitor conversion range from the genuinely heinous to the absurdly minor. Yes, traitors and heretics might be turned into servitors rather than simply executed. Yes, someone who has directly harmed the Adeptus Mechanicus or stolen their technology might face this fate. But so might someone who failed to meet their production quota, someone who spoke out against local imperial authorities, someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and got swept up in a purge. The Imperium's justice system is deliberately vague about what constitutes a servitor-worthy crime, which means in practice that almost anyone can be condemned to this fate, if someone with authority decides it's appropriate. What makes this particularly insidious is that servitor conversion is sold as mercy. The criminals are told they're being given a chance to redeem themselves through service to the Imperium. They're told that rather than being executed, they'll continue to be useful, that they'll be granted the honor of serving the Omnissiah and the Emperor through their transformation. It's painted as an opportunity for redemption, when in reality, it's a fate worse than death. Death at least offers the possibility of peace. Servitor conversion offers only the complete annihilation of the self while keeping the body alive and aware on some level. Because that's the truly horrifying secret about servitors. They're not as mindless as they appear. Medical evidence suggests that some level of consciousness remains trapped inside, unable to express itself, unable to do anything but endure. Occasionally, a servitor will suffer physical trauma that disrupts the neural programming, and when this happens, fragments of the original personality can resurface. When it does, the result is almost always horrific. The servitor might start screaming, "Help me," over and over, trapped in a body they can no longer control, unable to even end their own suffering. Others become violently aware of their situation and attack their masters in a desperate bid for freedom. Some simply weep uncontrollably, mourning for the person they once were. In one documented case from the Adeptus Mechanicus records, a loader servitor's programming was disrupted during a shuttle crash. The original consciousness reasserted itself briefly, and the servitor, once a man named Ismail, managed to communicate with the tech priests around him. He described his existence as a waking nightmare, aware but unable to act, forced to observe his own body performing tasks, while his mind screamed silently inside its prison. The tech priests, rather than showing mercy, simply reinstalled his behavioral protocols and put him back to work. After all, he was expensive to create and still functionally operational. The fact that a human mind was trapped inside and suffering was irrelevant. Consider what this means for the millions of servitors throughout the Imperium. How many of them retain some spark of awareness? How many are silently, desperately conscious, trapped in bodies that won't obey them, forced to perform the same meaningless tasks for years or decades until their bodies finally give out? Even if only a fraction of servitors remain partially aware, that represents millions upon millions of people experiencing a torment that makes conventional torture look merciful by comparison. And, unlike torture, which at least eventually ends, the servitor's suffering continues for as long as their augmented body can be kept functioning. The different types of servitors reveal how thoroughly the Imperium has normalized this practice. There are combat servitors equipped with heavy weapons and used as disposable shock troops. There are medical servitors programmed with surgical knowledge and used to assist in operations. There are cherubs created from the bodies of children and turned into flying decorative elements that perform minor tasks. Yes, you read that correctly. The Imperium takes children's bodies and turns them into servitors. The official explanation is that these are clones or vat-grown bodies. But even some loyalist sources admit that occasionally real children who die young are honored by being preserved and modified in this way. Even Robuta Gilliman, the returned Primarch, finds cherubs disturbing, viewing them as a sign of how far the Imperium has fallen into madness. Space Marine chapters have their own servitors, often created from failed aspirants who survived the transformation process but couldn't complete it. These young men, boys really, who dreamed of becoming warriors in service to the Emperor, instead find themselves lobotomized and made into living tools for the chapter. It's seen as better than simply killing them, as at least they get to serve in some capacity. The fact that they undergo transformation while still conscious, feeling every moment of pain as their minds are wiped and their bodies are modified, is considered character building. If they scream during the process, it's seen as weakness. If they endure silently, they're praised for their fortitude, even as everything they are is destroyed. The Imperium produces more servitors every single day than some civilizations have total population. The Adeptus Mechanicus has entire facilities dedicated to servitor creation. assembly lines where criminals and vat-grown bodies alike are processed with industrial efficiency. Tech priests oversee the operations with the same emotional investment they'd give to building a toaster. There's no ceremony, no acknowledgement of the human cost, no mourning for the people being destroyed. It's just another day at the manufactorum, another batch of raw materials being converted into useful products. The economic aspect of servitors reveals another ugly truth. On many worlds, the widespread use of servitors has created massive unemployment. Why hire 20 human workers when one servitor can do the same work without pay, without rest, without complaint? Industries that once employed thousands now operate with skeleton crews of overseers managing armies of servitors. The displaced workers face poverty, starvation, or ironically enough, the risk of being convicted of crimes of desperation that will get them turned into servitors themselves. The servitor program doesn't just destroy individuals, it undermines entire economies and societies. What makes the servitor program particularly damnable is that it's completely unnecessary. The prohibition against artificial intelligence made sense in the aftermath of the cybernetic revolts, when rogue machines nearly destroyed human civilization. But 10,000 years later, the Imperium clings to this prohibition, not because AI is genuinely dangerous, but because it's become religious dogma. The Mechanicus worships the Omnissiah and views machine spirits as sacred. True AI is heresy not because it's actually threatening, but because the cult Mechanicus says it is. If the Imperium were willing to develop proper AI technology, carefully, with safeguards, with oversight, the servitor program could be eliminated entirely. The functions servitors perform could be handled by true machines that don't require the destruction of human consciousness. But that would require admitting that the servitor program is wrong and the Imperium is constitutionally incapable of such self-reflection. Instead, servitor creation continues to be one of the most common punishments in imperial law, a fate that awaits anyone who displeases the wrong person or violates the wrong regulation. And because servitors are so common, so normalized, so utterly mundane in imperial society, nobody questions it anymore. Walk past a servitor, and you're walking past what used to be a person, someone who had a name and a life, and hopes for the future, all of it stripped away and replaced with mindless obedience to programming. And you'll keep walking without a second thought, because in the Imperium, human life is the cheapest and most renewable resource available. The Golden Throne, 1,000 souls, every day. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, in chambers so vast they could hold entire armies, sits the Golden Throne. Upon it, maintained by technology that nobody fully understands anymore, sustained by machinery that cannot be repaired or replaced, rests the Emperor of mankind. Once he was the greatest of humanity, a being of incomprehensible power and vision who united Terra and led humanity to reclaim the stars. Now he is a withered corpse, his body slowly decaying over the span of 10 millennia. His consciousness spread across the galaxy, maintaining the psychic beacon known as the Astronomicon. And every single day, 1,000 psychers are sacrificed to keep him alive. Let that number sink in for a moment. 1,000. Not 1,000 over the course of a year. Not 1,000 during times of crisis. 1,000 every single day. That's 41,666 human beings sacrificed every year, just to maintain the Emperor's barely living state. Over the course of 10,000 years, that's 416,660,000 people who have had their life force drained away to feed the Golden Throne. And recent reports suggest that the number is increasing. Tech priests managing the throne report that it's becoming less efficient, requiring more psychic energy to maintain the same level of power. By some estimates, the daily requirement has quadrupled from what it was immediately after the Horus heresy. That means potentially 4,000 psychers per day being consumed by the dying God Emperor of mankind. Who are these psychers? Where do they come from? They're not volunteers. They're not criminals or traitors deserving of death. They're children, mostly, young people whose psychic abilities manifested somewhere in the Imperium's million worlds. The black ships of the Inquisition travel on carefully calculated routes throughout Imperial space, collecting psychers from every world they visit. Some of these psychers are dangerous, their uncontrolled powers threatening to tear open holes in reality and let demons through. These individuals genuinely need to be taken into custody for the safety of everyone around them. But others are perfectly stable, their powers weak enough to be controlled, their potential to serve the Imperium in other ways significant. It doesn't matter. All psychers collected by the black ships are taken to Terra for evaluation. The strongest and most stable are recruited into the Imperium's various organizations: the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Inquisition, the Space Marine Librarius, the Grey Knights. These are the lucky ones, though luck is a relative term when your alternative is being drained of your life force to feed a corpse god. The vast majority of psychers, those whose powers are too weak to be useful or whose stability is questionable, are destined for the Golden Throne. They're the fuel that keeps the Imperium running, the raw material, consumed by the machine of state. What does it actually mean to be sacrificed to the Golden Throne? The process is not instantaneous, not a quick and merciful end. The psychers are brought into the throne room in groups, 1,000 at a time, their wrists bound and their minds clouded by drugs to keep them manageable. They're placed in specialized caskets that ring the Golden Throne, complex mechanisms that connect their psychic essence to the Emperor's faltering life force. Then the process begins. Their psychic power is drained away gradually, their life force consumed to feed the psychic beacon that guides ships through the warp. It takes hours. Some sources suggest it can take days. During that time, they're conscious and aware of what's happening to them, feeling their very soul being ripped away piece by piece. Imagine what that feels like. You're a teenager, maybe 16 or 17 years old. Your psychic abilities manifested a few years ago. Nothing dramatic, just the ability to sense emotions or move small objects with your mind. The black ships came and took you from your family. You were told you'd serve the Emperor, that your gift meant you were special, that you'd be trained to use your powers for the good of the Imperium. Instead, you find yourself in a casket beneath the Imperial Palace, feeling your essence being drawn out of you like blood from an open wound. You try to scream, but the drugs keep you paralyzed. You feel yourself dying, not the quick death of violence, but the slow dissolution of everything you are. And you die knowing that tomorrow, another 1,000 psychers will take your place, and the day after that, another 1,000, on and on, forever. The true horror is that this sacrifice might not even be necessary. Before he was interred upon the Golden Throne, the Emperor designed it as a means to access the webway, the ancient Eldar network of tunnels through the warp. The goal was to free humanity from dependence on warp travel and the dangers it posed. The throne was never meant to be a life support system. When Magnus the Red accidentally breached the Emperor's psychic wards around the webway project, demons flooded into the human-made sections, and the Emperor had to take his place on the throne to hold them back. After his battle with Horus left him mortally wounded, the throne was hastily retrofitted to keep him alive. The current configuration is essentially a jury-rigged emergency measure that's been running for 10,000 years beyond its design parameters. The Emperor himself might not want this. Before the heresy, he was emphatic that he was not a god and should not be worshipped. He specifically ordered the word-bearers to stop spreading the imperial cult, even going so far as to force them to kneel in the ashes of a city they'd built in his name. The current Imperium, with its fanatical worship of the Emperor as the god of mankind, is the exact opposite of what he wanted, and the daily sacrifice of psychers to keep his broken body alive. There's no evidence he ever wanted or ordered such a thing. It's possible that the greatest perpetual atrocity committed by the Imperium is being done against the Emperor's own wishes, that the god they worship would be horrified by what they do in his name. The situation becomes even more damnable when you consider the long-term implications. The Golden Throne is failing. Every tech priest who examines it admits that components are breaking down, systems are failing, and they lack the knowledge to perform proper repairs. Several attempted repairs have nearly killed the Emperor outright, the last one requiring the intervention of the Primarch Reboot Guilliman to prevent complete catastrophe. At some point, and it might be decades or it might be tomorrow, the Golden Throne will cease to function entirely. When that happens, the Emperor will die, the Astronomicon will go dark, and the Imperium will be plunged into chaos as warp travel becomes impossible, and Terra itself might be consumed by the demonic breach that the Emperor has been holding back. The Imperium's response to this crisis is to keep feeding more psychers into the Golden Throne, hoping that raw psychic power can somehow compensate for mechanical failure. It's like pouring more fuel into a car whose engine is seizing, hoping that somehow quantity will overcome the fundamental breakdown of the system. Every day that the Imperium continues this practice is another day where 1,000 lives are spent on a stopgap measure that cannot possibly work in the long term. They're not solving the problem, they're just delaying it while consuming vast numbers of human lives in the process. Think about what those 400 million sacrificed psychers could have accomplished if they'd been allowed to live. Each one was a human being with potential, with abilities that could have been put to productive use. They could have been sanctioned psychers serving on ships, allowing the Imperium to expand its presence in dangerous regions. They could have been trained to fight demons and heretics. They could have been researchers, teachers, leaders in their communities. Instead, their potential was consumed to maintain a system that everyone knows is failing, a system that serves primarily to perpetuate the power structure that depends on the Emperor's continued semi-existence. The psychological impact on those who manage the sacrifice is another overlooked aspect. The priests and tech adepts who oversee the daily feeding of the Golden Throne must process 1,000 people every day, watch 1,000 people die slowly and painfully, and then do it again tomorrow. How do you maintain your humanity when your job is to essentially murder 1,000 people daily? The answer is that you don't. You rationalize. You tell yourself it's necessary. You convince yourself that these psychers are dangerous anyway, that they'd probably become possessed by demons if left alive, that their sacrifice serves a greater good. You dehumanize them until they're not people anymore but resources, fuel for the machine, and eventually you become as much of a machine as the servitors that shamble through the corridors of the Imperial Palace. What makes this particularly cruel is that psychers in the Imperium live in constant fear. From the moment their powers manifest, they know they might be taken by the black ships. Families hide their psychic children, knowing that the alternative is losing them forever. Psychers who manage to evade detection live in constant terror of being discovered, and the Imperium's propaganda actively encourages the persecution and reporting of psychers, painting them as dangerous mutants who threaten everyone around them. This creates an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, where neighbors inform on neighbors, where children are taught to report their own parents if they show signs of psychic ability. The result is a self-perpetuating cycle of suffering. Psychers are persecuted, which drives some to desperation and chaos worship, which justifies continued persecution. Those who are caught are either trained as weapons for the Imperium's wars or fed to the Golden Throne. The Imperium presents this as the only solution, as the necessary price of survival in a galaxy where unsanctioned psychers can become doorways for demons. But other factions manage their psychers without resorting to daily mass sacrifice. The Eldar train their psychers extensively and safely. Even the Tau have begun to understand and utilize psychic abilities without needing to create rivers of blood to do so. The Imperium's methods are not the only way. They're just the way that has become so normalized that nobody questions it anymore. And so every day, as the sun rises over Terra, another 1,000 psychers are led to the Golden Throne. They die slowly and in agony, their life force consumed by an emperor who might not even want this sacrifice. whose dream of a rational, enlightened humanity has been perverted into a nightmare of superstition and mass murder. Their deaths accomplish nothing but postponing the inevitable, buying a few more years or decades before the whole system collapses. But the killing continues because the Imperium cannot imagine any other way, cannot conceive of a solution that doesn't involve the daily consumption of its own children. The Golden Throne hungers, and the Imperium feeds it, and humanity bleeds 1,000 cuts every single day. Space Marine recruitment, the systematic militarization of children. The Space Marines are icons of the Imperium, superhuman warriors standing 8 feet tall and clad in power armor, capable of defeating entire armies through sheer might and skill. They're presented as the ultimate defenders of humanity, the Emperor's angels of death, the finest warriors the Imperium can produce. But behind the propaganda and the glory, the process of creating these warriors involves the systematic abduction, torture, and frequently death of children. The Space Marine recruitment program is child soldiering on a scale and brutality that would make warlords in the darkest parts of our own history blanch. Let's be absolutely clear about the ages involved here. Space Marines are not created from adult volunteers. They cannot be. The biological modifications required to transform a normal human into an Astartes must begin before or during puberty, typically between the ages of 10 and 14 years old. Some chapters recruit even younger, taking children as young as 7 or 8. These aren't young men making informed decisions about military service. These are children, some barely old enough to understand what's happening to them, being dragged into a process that will kill the vast majority of them and forever change the survivors. The recruitment process varies by chapter, but the common thread is that it's deliberately brutal and designed to weed out anyone who isn't physically perfect and psychologically resilient beyond normal human limits. The Space Wolves of Fenris watch the tribal warfare on their home world, looking for youths who show exceptional promise in battle. Never mind that these youths are often fighting for their lives at ages when children in peaceful societies would be in school. The Blood Angels of Baal recruit from the radiation-poisoned wastes of their world, where only the strongest children survive to adolescence. The Dark Angels take the strongest juveniles from the feral and feudal worlds they've designated as recruitment grounds, with those who fail the initial tests often being euthanized to keep the chapter's secrets. What happens to the children who are selected? First, they're taken from their homes and families, often with no warning and no opportunity for goodbye. One day, they're part of their community, the next, they're property of the chapter. For chapters that recruit from feral or death worlds, the children might see this as an honor, might even compete for the chance. But honor means nothing when you're 10 years old and being told you'll never see your parents again. The Black Templars, who have no home world, recruit from across the Imperium, taking children from wherever they find suitable candidates. Imagine being a child on a civilized world, living a relatively normal life, and then armored giants appear and take you away forever. Then comes the testing. Every chapter has trials designed to separate the worthy from the unworthy, and these trials are deliberately lethal. The Space Wolves force aspirants to travel alone across the frozen wastes of Fenris, fighting off both the elements and the world's deadly fauna. Many freeze to death or are torn apart by monsters. The Blood Angels lock their aspirants in sarcophagi for a year, during which time they're bombarded with the genetic memories of their Primarch. Some go mad from the experience and have to be euthanized. Others simply die from the trauma. The Dark Angels subject their aspirants to tests of strength, agility, and endurance that would be considered torture if applied to adult prisoners. Those who fail at any stage are killed to protect the chapter's secrets. But even those who pass the initial trials face something far worse: the implantation of the gene seed. Creating a Space Marine requires the surgical implantation of 19 separate organs over the course of several years. This isn't like getting an appendix removed. Each implant requires major surgery, often performed without proper anesthetic, because the aspirant is expected to endure the pain as part of the process. A secondary heart is inserted into the chest cavity. New lungs are grown to replace the original ones. A third lung, called the ulitic kidney, is implanted to allow the marine to breathe in toxic environments. The osmodula begins secreting hormones that cause the skeleton to grow and strengthen. The biscopea causes massive muscle growth. The implants go on and on, each one requiring surgery that cuts into the child's body and alters it fundamentally. The mortality rate for this process is staggering. Even among the carefully selected aspirants who've already survived the initial trials, 50% or more die during the implantation process. Their bodies reject the gene seed. Their organs fail under the strain of transformation. They suffer fatal complications from the surgeries. Sometimes the gene seed itself is flawed, causing mutations that require the aspirant to be put down like a rabid animal. The lucky ones die quickly. The unlucky ones linger in agony as their bodies revolt against the foreign organs being forced into them. And what happens to the aspirants who survive the surgeries but fail to complete the transformation? They don't get to go home. They can't. They know too much about the chapter, have seen too many secrets, have been exposed to knowledge that can't be allowed to spread. Some chapters turn these failed aspirants into chapter serfs, human servants, who will spend the rest of their lives in service to the chapter that mutilated them. Others are lobotomized and turned into servitors. Some chapters, particularly those with darker reputations, simply execute the failures and harvest their gene seed for future attempts. Either way, a child who volunteered or was forced to undergo the transformation process and failed through no fault of their own never gets their life back. Even those who successfully become Space Marines have paid a terrible price. They're no longer capable of having normal human relationships. The psychological conditioning and hypno-doctrination they undergo during training suppresses normal emotional responses, making them effective soldiers but terrible at anything else. They can't relate to baseline humans anymore. They can't feel romantic love. Many can't even maintain normal friendships outside their battle brothers. They're living weapons, created by taking children and systematically destroying everything that made them children, replacing it with indoctrination and combat training. The psychological manipulation begins early in the process. Aspirants are subjected to hypnotherapy that implants absolute loyalty to the Emperor and the chapter. They're indoctrinated with the belief that they're superior to baseline humans, that their purpose is to wage eternal war, that death in battle is the only honorable end. This isn't education, it's brainwashing. These children are having their personalities overwritten, their capacity for independent thought curtailed, their entire worldview reshaped to serve the Imperium's military needs. Consider the scale of this operation. There are roughly 1,000 Space Marine chapters in the Imperium, each maintaining a strength of about 1,000 Marines. That's 1 million Space Marines total. Given their casualties in the endless wars they fight, each chapter probably recruits and processes dozens if not hundreds of aspirants per year just to maintain their numbers. That means tens of thousands of children every year are taken from their homes, subjected to brutal trials and horrific surgeries, with more than half dying in the process. Over 10,000 years, the number of children who have died trying to become Space Marines reaches into the billions. But the Imperium presents this as glory. Recruitment is painted as the highest honor a child can receive. Parents on recruitment worlds are told to be proud if their son is selected, even knowing they'll never see him again, and he's more likely to die than to successfully transform. The propaganda is so effective that on some worlds, children actually compete for the chance to be chosen, seeing it as their one opportunity to escape a life of poverty or meaninglessness. The Imperium has convinced its population that having your child taken away and probably killed is something to celebrate. The alternative to using children would be to develop methods for transforming adults into Space Marines, or to find other ways to create superhuman soldiers. During the Great Crusade, there's evidence that adult transformation was at least sometimes possible, suggesting that the current restriction to pre-adolescent recruits is not necessarily biologically required, but has become standard practice because it's more effective. Research into adult transformation methods has been declared heretical by the Imperium's religious authorities, not because it's impossible, but because it deviates from the traditional methods laid down 10,000 years ago. What makes the recruitment program particularly damnable is that it's completely normalized. Nobody in the Imperium questions whether it's right to take children and subject them to processes that will likely kill them. The Space Marines themselves don't see anything wrong with it. They underwent the same process and consider it their sacred duty to perpetuate it. The populations of recruitment worlds have been conditioned to accept it. The Imperium's propaganda machine glorifies it, and anyone who does question it is likely to be accused of heresy, or at minimum seen as weak, as someone who doesn't understand the necessity of sacrifice in humanity's eternal war for survival. The result is that every single day, somewhere in the Imperium, children are being taken from their homes to begin a process that will almost certainly kill them or transform them into post-human warriors who can never go back to the lives they once knew. The Emperor's angels of death are created by taking children and destroying them one way or another. Some die in the trials, some die from the surgeries, some survive but are mentally and physically broken, and the handful who successfully complete the transformation become living weapons who will spend the rest of their extended lives fighting and killing until they finally fall in battle. There's no retirement, no discharge, no return to civilian life. They're soldiers from the moment they're selected until the day they die, having never been given the choice to be anything else. Penitent engines and archoflagellants, punishments beyond death. In the darkest corners of the Imperium's justice system, for those whose crimes are deemed too severe for mere execution, but whose lives might still have some use, there exist punishments that combine suffering, humiliation, and eventual death into a single, horrific fate. These are the penitent engines and the archoflagellants, and they represent the Imperium's belief that some sinners must endure torment beyond death, that their pain can somehow purify their souls and make them worthy in the Emperor's eyes. In reality, they're nothing more than torture devices disguised as redemption, the Imperium's way of turning condemned people into weapons, while ensuring they suffer every moment until their inevitable deaths. Let's start with the archoflagellant, a punishment reserved for heretics who are deemed worthy of a chance at redemption. The term worthy is doing a lot of work here, because what actually qualifies someone for archoflagellation is often arbitrary and dependent on the whims of whoever's passing judgment. You might be a genuinely dangerous heretic who tried to summon demons, or you might be someone who spoke out against the ecclesiarchy, or you might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time and gotten caught up in a purge. The Imperium's justice system makes no real distinction between these cases. If you're deemed appropriate for archoflagellation, you're going to receive it regardless of whether your crime actually justified such extreme punishment. The process begins with surgery, and like everything the Imperium does to human bodies, it's brutal and irreversible. The condemned is turned over to the Adeptus Mechanicus, who will perform the actual modifications. First comes the lobotomy, not a careful, surgical procedure designed to minimize damage, but a crude destruction of the prefrontal cortex. Everything that makes you who you are, your personality, your memories, your ability to reason and plan and feel normal human emotions, is either destroyed outright or suppressed so thoroughly it might as well be gone. What's left is a shell, capable of movement and basic responses, but lacking any higher cognitive function. Then the physical modifications begin. Both arms are amputated and replaced with weapons. Usually, these are industrial tools repurposed for combat, heavy shears that can cut through armor, electroflails that deliver devastating shocks with every strike, pneumatics that can crack skulls and shatter bones. The idea is that the penitent will literally beat themselves to death against the enemies of the Imperium, their own modified body becoming the instrument of their atonement. A whole battery of chemical injectors is grafted directly onto the spine. These will pump combat drugs into the arcoflagellant's system during battle, turning them into a berserk killing machine that feels no pain and cannot stop fighting until they're completely destroyed. The final touch is the pacifier helmet, a device that makes the whole arrangement even more nightmarish than it already sounds. When the helmet is active, it keeps the arcoflagellant docile, flooding their mind with religious imagery and hymns. They shuffle around in a daze, barely aware of their surroundings, kept in a state that's described as deadened bliss. But this isn't mercy. It's just making them easier to control. When battle comes, the helmet is deactivated, and the chemical injectors activate, pumping the arcoflagellant's body full of drugs like Frenzon, Slort, and Spur. The result is a transformation from shuffling zombie to screaming berserker, a creature that will throw itself at the enemy with no regard for self-preservation, hacking and slashing until either the enemy is dead or it is. The cruelty doesn't end with the modification. Consider what it means to be an arcoflagellant. When the helmet is active, you're trapped in a fog of enforced religious ecstasy, unable to think clearly or control your own actions. When it's deactivated, you're pumped full of chemicals that override any remaining will and turn you into a mindless killing machine. There's no moment when you're just yourself. There's no peace, no rest, no reprieve from the nightmare your existence has become. You're a weapon that happens to be made of meat, used and discarded by people who see you as less than human. And here's the most damnable part. Occasionally, the brain damage isn't total. Sometimes fragments of the original personality remain, trapped inside and aware. Imagine being conscious inside your own body, but unable to control it, forced to watch as your hands, now replaced by industrial shears, tear through human flesh. Imagine being aware during battle, feeling the impact of enemy weapons on your body but unable to stop your berserk charge. The Imperium calls this redemption. They tell the condemned that through suffering and death in the Emperor's service, they might earn forgiveness for their sins. But there's no redemption in this. It's just torture stretched out over however long the arcoflagellant's drug-enhanced body can survive combat. If arcoflagellants represent the Imperium's idea of punishment for major heresy, penitent engines are what happens when even that isn't severe enough. These are enormous combat walkers, bipedal machines equipped with massive weapons, used by the ecclesiarchy as heavy support units. The pilot of a penitent engine is someone whose crimes are considered so terrible that imprisonment, exile, arcoflagellation, or even execution are all deemed too lenient. Think about that for a moment. You've committed a crime so heinous that the Imperium, which routinely executes people for minor infractions, thinks execution would be getting off easy. That's when you get sentenced to pilot a penitent engine. The pilot is hardwired directly into the front of the machine, not enclosed inside it like a space marine in a dreadnought, but exposed, strapped to the front of the combat walker where enemy fire can reach them. Fiber optic neural connectors are drilled into their skull and spine. Chemical injectors are implanted into their brain. Tubes and wires and cables run from their body into the machine, making them part of its systems. They're kept alive through the walker's life support, fed nutrients and stimulants that ensure they remain conscious and aware throughout their service. The psychological torment of being a penitent engine pilot is carefully engineered. Chemical injectors pump the pilot full of stimulants and guilt-inducing compounds. The pilot becomes convinced that every enemy they face is a reflection of their own sin, that they're fighting against themselves, against their own guilt made manifest. When they reach melee range, the chemicals change, making them see their own face in the faces of their enemies. So every person they kill with the penitent engine's massive power saws and buzzing blades, every body they rip apart with the walker's hydraulic fists, they see as themselves. They're killing their own guilt over and over, except the guilt never dies. and they never achieve the redemption they're promised. The pilot feels everything. That's intentional. The stimulants keep them alive and aware despite injuries that would kill a normal person. Enemy fire that strikes the exposed pilot causes excruciating pain, but the chemicals won't let them die from it. They have to endure, have to keep fighting, have to keep experiencing agony in the hope that somehow, through enough suffering, they might earn forgiveness. The ecclesiarchy calls this a path to redemption. In reality, it's torture extended into combat, a way of making someone's death as prolonged and agonizing as possible, while extracting military utility from their suffering. Both archoflagellants and penitent engines are presented as opportunities for redemption, as chances for the condemned to prove their loyalty to the emperor through suffering and death. The propaganda is effective enough that some people actually volunteer for these fates, believing that this is their only path to salvation. Those who genuinely volunteer are often former members of the ecclesiarchy or the Sisters of Battle, people so indoctrinated that they believe their sins, which might be nothing more than minor failures in their duty, warrant this level of punishment. The Imperium has convinced them that eternal torture followed by death is what they deserve, and they embrace it willingly. But the vast majority of those condemned to these fates are not volunteers. They're people who ran afoul of the Imperium's arbitrary justice system, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or who committed crimes that in any reasonable society would warrant punishment far less severe. The Imperium doesn't care. The judgment has been passed, the sentence carried out, and another batch of condemned people are processed through the manufactorums that create archoflagellants and penitent engines. The tech priests performing the surgeries view it as routine maintenance, no different from repairing a tank or calibrating a weapons system. Think about what this says about imperial justice. It's not enough to kill criminals. It's not enough to imprison them or exile them or even turn them into servitors. For some crimes, crimes that the Imperium itself defines, and which can be as minor as speaking against local authorities, the punishment must involve prolonged torture, the complete destruction of the person's humanity, and eventual death in combat. And this is seen as mercy, as an opportunity for redemption, as the condemned person getting a chance to serve the emperor one last time. The scale of the penitent engine and archoflagellant programs is difficult to determine, but the sheer number of these units deployed across the Imperium suggests it's substantial. Every ecclesiarchy army has archoflagellant packs. Many orders militant of the Adepta Sororitas maintain penitent engines. These aren't rare or unusual. They're standard components of imperial military forces, which means the Imperium is constantly processing new batches of condemned people through these punishment systems. How many people are being turned into archoflagellants every year? How many are strapped to the front of penitent engines? The numbers are probably in the thousands annually, possibly tens of thousands across the entire Imperium. And for what purpose? What do these punishments actually accomplish? They don't deter crime. The Imperium's crime rates remain high despite the severity of its punishments. They don't rehabilitate anyone. The condemned are either dead or so thoroughly destroyed that the original person no longer exists. They don't even particularly advance the Imperium's military goals. Archoflagellants and penitent engines are useful in combat, but not significantly more so than conventional weapons systems. The real purpose is to instill fear, to show the population what happens to those who displease the Imperium, to make everyone understand that there are fates worse than death, and the Imperium will not hesitate to inflict them. In the end, the penitent engine pilot dies. The stimulants can only keep them alive for so long. The accumulated damage from enemy fire, the stress on their body from the constant chemical stimulation, the sheer trauma of being hardwired to a combat walker, it all takes its toll. Eventually, they fall in battle, and if they're lucky, that's the end. If they're unlucky, they're recovered and repaired, sent back into combat for another round of agony. The Imperium calls this redemption. The pilot dies believing they've earned forgiveness, that their suffering has cleansed their soul. In reality, they've simply been used up and discarded. one more life consumed by the Imperium's endless appetite for suffering. The Inquisition, when absolute power meets zero accountability. In a galaxy where human life is cheap and justice is arbitrary, few institutions embody the Imperium's capacity for cruelty quite like the Inquisition. Created in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy to root out treachery before it could threaten the Imperium again, the Inquisition has become something far more sinister than its founders could have imagined. It's an organization that operates with absolute authority, answerable to no one, capable of ordering the deaths of billions on nothing more than suspicion. An inquisitor is judge, jury, and executioner rolled into one, and there is no appeal, no oversight, no recourse for those who fall under their scrutiny. The Inquisition doesn't make mistakes, it tells itself, and when it does, the evidence is usually dead anyway. Let's understand exactly how much power an inquisitor wields. They can commandeer any imperial resource they deem necessary for their mission. Need a battle fleet? You can requisition it. Need an entire Space Marine chapter? You can demand their assistance. Need to shut down production on a forge world? You have the authority. An inquisitor can walk onto any imperial world and arrest anyone, from the lowliest laborer to the planetary governor himself. They can order executions without trial. They can declare entire populations guilty of heresy. They can call down exterminators and destroy billions of lives with a single command. And they answer to no one except other inquisitors, who may or may not agree with their actions, and often won't find out about them until long after the fact. This level of power would be dangerous in the hands of saints. In the hands of fallible human beings, which is what inquisitors are, despite their authority, it's a recipe for atrocity on a massive scale. And atrocities are exactly what the Inquisition commits, day after day, across the Imperium's million worlds. Some of these are deliberate acts by radical inquisitors who believe the ends justify any means. But many are committed by well-meaning inquisitors who genuinely believe they're protecting humanity, who've convinced themselves that whatever they do is justified because the alternative is chaos or Xenos domination. The road to hell isn't just paved with good intentions in the Imperium. It's paved with the bodies of everyone an inquisitor decided was a threat. The Inquisition's torture methods are formalized into what they call the 9 actions, a progression of interrogation techniques that range from simple questioning to methods that would make medieval inquisitors look humane by comparison. The technology available to imperial torturers is sophisticated enough that they can inflict unimaginable pain without actually causing physical damage, allowing the same subject to be tortured repeatedly. The justification is always the same. They need information, they need confessions, they need to verify loyalty. But torture is famously unreliable for extracting accurate information. People will say anything to make the pain stop, including confessing to crimes they didn't commit or implicating innocent people to redirect the torture elsewhere. The Inquisition knows this. Their own texts and training materials acknowledge that torture often produces false confessions. They don't care, because torture serves another purpose beyond information extraction. It's a tool of terror. When people know that falling under inquisitorial scrutiny means torture regardless of innocence or guilt, they become compliant. They police themselves. They inform on their neighbors. They don't question authority because the alternative is too horrific to contemplate. The torture isn't about finding truth. It's about breaking spirits and maintaining control through fear. Consider the concept of the 9 actions more carefully. Action 1 is simple questioning. By action 3, you're being subjected to physical torture. By action 5, the technology being used can inflict pain that the human body and brain literally cannot process without permanent damage. Action 9, the final stage, involves methods so extreme that they're rarely survived and even more rarely leave the subject mentally intact. And these aren't reserved for confirmed traitors or demon worshippers. These are used on anyone an inquisitor suspects might have information, might be corrupted, or might pose a threat. Guilt or innocence is often irrelevant. If you're under investigation, You're going through the actions until the Inquisitor is satisfied. The verdicts an Inquisitor can render are all essentially death sentences, just with variations in the method. Traitors are executed outright, usually after prolonged torture. Heretics might be given a chance at redemption through service to the Imperium, which means being turned into an archoflagellant strapped to a penitent engine, or serving in a penal legion where life expectancy is measured in hours. Those deemed salvageable might be mind-wiped, their entire personality erased and replaced with one loyal to the Imperium. In practice, this is a fate worse than death, because while the body survives, the person who once inhabited it is gone forever. Imagine having your children returned to you after inquisitorial investigation, except they have no memory of you, no recognition, no trace of the person they used to be. The body is the same, but your child is dead, replaced by a stranger wearing their face. The Inquisition's jurisdiction is deliberately vague, which means almost anything can be construed as heresy, if an Inquisitor decides it is. Worshipping the Emperor incorrectly, heresy. Possessing forbidden knowledge, heresy. Being in the wrong place when a demon attack occurred. Possible corruption, which is treated the same as actual heresy. Knowing too much about the Inquisition's activities, definitely heresy, because that information can't be allowed to spread. The Inquisition has made it policy to execute witnesses to demon incursions, even when those witnesses were loyal imperial citizens who fought against the demons. The justification is that knowledge of chaos is inherently corrupting. The reality is that the Inquisition kills people to keep its secrets, regardless of whether those people pose any actual threat. Let's talk about specific examples of inquisitorial excess. During the First War for Armageddon, after the forces of Angron and the World Eaters were defeated, the Inquisition decided that the Imperial Guard regiments that had fought against demons needed to be cleansed of potential corruption. These were soldiers who had won a major victory against chaos, who had stood firm against demon primarchs and traitor space marines. Their reward was to be rounded up and either executed or mind-wiped. Those who survived the process were sent to lifelong service in the most dangerous war zones the Imperium could find. The Space Wolves were so disgusted by this that they actually fought against the Inquisition and the Grey Knights to protect these survivors, resulting in Imperial forces killing each other over whether to murder their own heroes. Or consider Inquisitor Cryptman, who responded to the Tyranid threat by ordering exterminatus on dozens of worlds in the Tyranid's path. Not worlds that had been infested, but worlds that might be infested in the future. He killed billions of loyal Imperial citizens in a preemptive strike, depopulating entire sectors to deny the Tyranids biomass. When other Inquisitors finally moved against him for this, it wasn't because he'd committed mass murder. They agreed with the logic. They moved against him because he'd destroyed so many worlds that it was becoming strategically counterproductive. The Inquisition's definition of going too far isn't killing billions. It's killing so many billions that it starts to affect military strategy. The radical versus Puritan divide within the Inquisition reveals just how arbitrary their judgments can be. Puritan Inquisitors believe in strict adherence to imperial doctrine and consider any deviation heresy. Radical Inquisitors believe the ends justify the means and will use chaos artifacts, work with Xenos, or employ clearly heretical methods if they think it will help defeat greater threats. Both sides are equally willing to kill innocents. They just disagree on methodology, and because there's no higher authority to arbitrate these disputes, the result is Inquisitors literally declaring each other heretics and hunting each other down, while the Imperium they're supposed to protect burns around them. The Inquisition also has the authority to mind-wipe space marines, which should terrify everyone. These are transhuman warriors, the Emperor's finest, genetically and psychologically engineered for loyalty and combat. Yet if an Inquisitor decides a space marine has seen too much or knows too much, they can order that marine's memories erased. The fact that this power exists and has been used reveals how little the Inquisition cares about any individual life, no matter how valuable or loyal. You can serve the Emperor faithfully for centuries, fight in his wars, bleed for his Imperium. And if you become inconvenient to an Inquisitor's investigation, your mind can be wiped clean and your identity destroyed. Perhaps most damning is the Inquisition's use of penal legions and suicide missions. When an Inquisitor needs disposable troops for particularly dangerous operations, they can requisition entire regiments of expendable forces. These might be soldiers who witnessed something they shouldn't have, populations from worlds under investigation, or just anyone the Inquisitor decides isn't worth saving but might be useful for one last mission. They're sent into impossible situations. Demon worlds, death worlds, suicide assaults, with the expectation that they'll all die, but might accomplish something useful before they do. It's death sentence by military deployment, and it happens constantly across the Imperium. The Inquisition justifies all of this by pointing to the threats facing humanity. They'll tell you about the subtle corruption of chaos, how a single cultist left alive can infect an entire world. They'll explain how demonic possession can spread through knowledge, how even knowing certain truths can make you vulnerable to the ruinous powers. They'll describe the nightmare scenarios where their investigation revealed just in time that a planetary governor was a Genestealer patriarch, or that an entire military command had been infiltrated by Alpha Legion operatives, or that a seemingly loyal world was weeks away from opening a warp rift. And sometimes they're right. Sometimes the Inquisition really does save billions by killing thousands. Sometimes their investigations do uncover genuine threats that would have destroyed entire sectors if left unchecked. But for every legitimate threat, the Inquisition stops. How many innocent people do they torture, mind wipe, or execute? How many lives are destroyed based on nothing more than suspicion? How many times does an Inquisitor declare an entire world corrupt because they found evidence of heresy in a single hive city, killing billions to eliminate thousands of actual cultists? The Inquisition operates on the principle that it's better to kill innocent people than to let a single heretic escape. They've taken better safe than sorry to its most horrific extreme, where safety means the complete elimination of anything that might possibly pose a threat. The truly terrifying thing about the Inquisition is that there's no way to protect yourself from them. You can be perfectly loyal, completely innocent, faithful to the Emperor all your life, and if an Inquisitor decides you're suspicious, you're finished. There's no trial where you can present evidence. There's no appeal to a higher authority. There's no public oversight to keep Inquisitors accountable. You're guilty until proven innocent, and proving innocence usually requires surviving torture, mind reading by sanctioned psychers, and interrogation techniques that can last for years. Even if you're eventually cleared, you'll likely be mind-wiped anyway, because you witnessed too much of the Inquisition's methods. The Inquisition represents the Imperium's paranoia made into policy, its fear of chaos transformed into systematic persecution of its own citizens. They're necessary, they tell themselves. Without them, heresy would spread unchecked, and the Imperium would fall. But at what point does the cure become worse than the disease? At what point does the organization meant to protect humanity become one of humanity's greatest threats? The Inquisition passed that point centuries ago, possibly millennia ago. But because they have absolute power and zero accountability, because there's no mechanism to rein them in or reform them, they continue to operate the same way they always have. They investigate, they torture, they execute, and they call it justice. And the Imperium bleeds from 1,000 different wounds inflicted by those who claim to be its protectors. Xenocide, the universal death sentence. Suffer not the alien to live isn't just a catchy phrase in the Imperium of man. It's official policy, religious doctrine, and a death sentence for trillions of intelligent beings whose only crime is not being human. The Imperium's stance on Xenos life is simple and absolute. All aliens are enemies. All alien species must be destroyed, and any human who suggests otherwise is a traitor worthy of death. This policy of universal xenocide isn't reserved for genuinely hostile species like the Tyranids or the Orcs. It applies to every alien the Imperium encounters, from the most warlike to the most peaceful, from the most powerful to the most primitive. If you're not human, the Imperium will kill you, and it won't lose a moment's sleep over it. The justification for this policy is wrapped up in the Imperium's history and propaganda. During the Age of Strife, when warp storms cut off human worlds from each other and human civilization collapsed, some alien species took advantage of humanity's weakness. They conquered human worlds, enslaved human populations, or simply exterminated humans to take their territory. The Elder Dominion allowed human colonies to suffer without intervention, caring nothing for the fate of a lesser species. When the Emperor began his Great Crusade to reunite humanity and reclaim the lost colonies, his forces encountered alien-ruled worlds where humans were second-class citizens or worse. These experiences informed the Imperium's xenophobic policies, creating the belief that aliens could never be trusted and must be eliminated before they could threaten humanity again. But here's the thing, that was 10,000 years ago. The galaxy has changed, the threats have changed, and more importantly, the Emperor's original policies weren't nearly as extreme as what came after. During the Great Crusade, the Emperor was willing to work with aliens when it served humanity's interests. He negotiated with xeno species, established treaties, even allowed some alien populations to continue existing as long as they didn't threaten human worlds. It was after the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne, after the Horus Heresy shattered the Imperium's original vision, that xenophobia became absolute doctrine. The High Lords and the ecclesiarchy codified "suffer not the alien to live" into religious law, and any nuance or willingness to negotiate was declared heresy. The result is that the Imperium has systematically destroyed species that posed no threat to it whatsoever. Take the case of the Interrex, a human civilization discovered during the Great Crusade that had successfully integrated with certain alien species, creating a multicultural society where humans and aliens worked together peacefully. They had sophisticated technology, stable governance, and posed no threat to the Imperium. The imperial response was to label them as corrupted by Xenos influence and prepare for their destruction. The Interrex might have become valuable allies, sharing their technology and knowledge. Instead, they were targeted for elimination because they violated the Imperium's dogma about human supremacy. Or consider the countless unnamed species that the Imperium has encountered and destroyed without even bothering to study them first. Exploration fleets find a world inhabited by aliens, determine that they're not human, and proceed with planetary cleansing. It doesn't matter if these aliens are sapient. It doesn't matter if they have culture, history, or technology. It doesn't matter if they tried to communicate or offered no resistance. The standing orders are clear. Eliminate all Xenos and claim the world for humanity. How many species have been driven to extinction by the Imperium's expansion? How many forms of alien life, each unique and irreplaceable, have been obliterated before anyone even learned their names? The policy doesn't even make strategic sense. In a galaxy full of existential threats, chaos, tyranids, necrons awakening from their tombs, the Imperium spends vast military resources fighting species that could potentially be allies. The Tau, for instance, have repeatedly tried to establish diplomatic relations with the Imperium, offering trade and cooperation. The Tau Empire actually protects human worlds within its borders, incorporates human auxiliaries into its military, and treats them better than the Imperium does in many cases. The logical response would be to negotiate, to establish some form of understanding, or at least non-aggression. The Imperial response has been to declare multiple crusades against the Tau, attempting to exterminate them despite the fact that doing so diverts forces from more pressing threats. The Exodite Eldar represent another missed opportunity. These are Eldar who fled the depravity of their civilization before the fall, living simple lives on maiden worlds far from the major conflicts of the galaxy. They pose absolutely no threat to humanity, actively avoid contact with other species, and want nothing more than to be left alone. The Imperium's response when discovering an exodite world is to launch exterminatus, or military assault to claim the planet for human colonization. The Eldar were here first, have sacred sites and ancient history tied to these worlds, and aren't bothering anyone. The Imperium kills them anyway because they're Xenos, and therefore have no right to exist. Some will argue that all aliens are inherently dangerous because they can't be trusted, that any Xenos species given the chance would destroy humanity if they could. But this is circular reasoning. The Imperium treats all aliens as enemies, which makes them enemies, which the Imperium then uses to justify treating them as enemies. If you systematically murder every member of a species you encounter, of course that species is going to fight back. The Imperium has created a self-fulfilling prophecy where its own xenocidal policies generate the alien hostility it claims to be defending against. The impact on human culture and knowledge has been devastating. Every alien species represents a unique perspective, a different approach to science and philosophy, a body of knowledge that could potentially benefit humanity. The Eldar have technology and understanding of the warp that far surpasses human capabilities. The Tau have innovations in materials science and military tactics. Even supposedly primitive species might have knowledge about their local regions of space that would be valuable to Imperial navigators and explorers. By killing every alien they meet, the Imperium has closed itself off from potentially valuable sources of information and advancement. The enforcement of anti-Xenos policy within the Imperium is brutal. Any human who advocates for peaceful coexistence with aliens, who suggests that maybe not all Xenos need to be exterminated, who proposes studying alien technology or learning from alien cultures, these people are declared traitors and heretics. The penalty is usually execution, sometimes after extensive torture to root out the supposed corruption that led them to such thoughts. The Imperium has made it impossible to even discuss alternative approaches to Xenos relations. The policy is dogma, and dogma cannot be questioned. The Death Watch, the Inquisition's specialized Xenos hunting space marines, exemplifies the Imperium's approach. These warriors are drawn from various chapters and trained specifically to kill aliens. Their entire purpose is the eradication of Xenos life in all its forms. They study alien physiology, not to understand or communicate, but to learn how to kill them more efficiently. They collect Xenos artifacts, not for research, but to lock them away or destroy them. The Death Watch represents the militarization of xenophobia, the transformation of species prejudice into military doctrine. What makes the Imperium's xenocide particularly damning is that it's not even achieving its stated goal. The galaxy isn't becoming safer for humanity through the extermination of alien species. If anything, it's becoming more dangerous. The Imperium has made enemies of species that might have been neutral or even friendly. It's driven alien populations to desperate measures, including alliances with Chaos or other dangerous factions. It's created power vacuums that are filled by more hostile species. The Tyranids, for instance, are drawn to biomass and conflict. The Imperium's constant warfare against Xenos species creates exactly the kind of activity that attracts Tyranid hive fleets. There's also the simple mathematical reality that the Imperium can't win a war against all Xenos simultaneously. The galaxy is vast beyond human comprehension, containing billions of stars and countless alien species. The Imperium occupies a fraction of the galaxy, controls perhaps 1 million worlds out of the billions that exist. Even if every Imperial world mobilized its entire population for war against the Xenos, they'd still be outnumbered. The only way humanity survives in the long term is through alliances, negotiation, and finding ways to coexist with at least some alien species. The Imperium's refusal to even consider this option isn't strength. It's a slow march toward extinction, disguised as righteous fury. The tragedy is that there are individual humans within the Imperium who understand this. Rogue traders who operate on the fringes of Imperial space sometimes develop working relationships with Xenos out of practical necessity. Some inquisitors, particularly those of Xenos Ordo, have come to understand that the galaxy is too complex for simple extermination policies. There are even records of Imperial Guard regiments that reach temporary truces with Xenos forces when faced with common enemies like Tyranids or Chaos. But these examples of pragmatism are exceptions that get people declared heretics if they become too public. The Emperor's original vision for humanity's place in the galaxy is debated among Imperial scholars, but some evidence suggests he wasn't as dogmatically xenophobic as the Imperium has become. He was pragmatic, willing to use any tool or form any alliance that served humanity's interests. The current policy of universal xenocide is less the Emperor's will and more the product of 10,000 years of institutional paranoia and religious extremism. It's what happens when fear becomes policy, when prejudice becomes dogma, and when an empire is too rigid to adapt to changing circumstances. And so the xenocide continues. Imperial forces burn alien cities, destroy alien civilizations, exterminate alien species down to the last individual. They do this while calling themselves humanity's protectors, while claiming the moral high ground, while declaring that they're the defenders of mankind against a hostile universe. But in their rush to kill aliens, they've become the hostile universe. They've made humanity into the very thing they claim to fight against, an implacable force of destruction that shows no mercy and accepts no surrender. The Imperium's xenocidal policies don't protect humanity. They doom it to eternal war against foes that multiply faster than they can be killed, and they ensure that when humanity finally does fall, it will be without friends, without allies, and without anyone in the galaxy mourning its passing. Conclusion: the Empire of Endless Suffering. We've journeyed through the darkest chambers of Imperial policy, examined the systematic horrors that the Imperium commits daily in the name of humanity's survival. We've seen worlds burn under exterminatus, their billions of inhabitants obliterated to solve problems that might not have required such extreme solutions. We've watched as human beings are lobotomized and cyberized into servitors, their consciousness trapped in biological machines until their bodies finally fail. We've witnessed the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psykers to keep a corpse god alive on a failing throne, a blood toll that has consumed hundreds of millions over 10 millennia. We've observed children taken from their homes and subjected to transformations that kill most of them and leave the survivors forever changed. We've encountered the walking nightmares of penitent engines and archoflagellants, punishments that extend torture beyond death itself. We've examined the Inquisition's reign of terror, where suspicion equals guilt, and there is no appeal from their judgments. We've confronted the Imperium's policy of universal xenocide, the automatic destruction of all alien life, regardless of threat or circumstance. Each of these crimes is horrific on its own. Together, they paint a picture of an empire that has lost its soul, a civilization that has sacrificed everything that made humanity worth preserving in the name of survival. The Imperium tells itself that these crimes are necessary, that without them humanity would fall to chaos or be devoured by the Xenos. And there's a sliver of truth to this. The galaxy in the 41st millennium is genuinely hostile. The threats facing humanity are real and existential. Chaos does corrupt. The Tyranids do devour. The Necrons do awaken. The threats are real. But the Imperium's response to these threats has become indistinguishable from the threats themselves. An empire that turns its own citizens into lobotomized slaves, that sacrifices thousands of its children daily, that destroys entire worlds rather than save them, that tortures and executes its own people on mere suspicion. This is not an empire defending humanity. This is an empire consuming humanity to perpetuate itself. The Imperium has become a machine that feeds on human lives, grinding them up to sustain its own existence, and calling this process necessary for survival. The real horror isn't just that the Imperium commits these crimes. It's that it has normalized them so thoroughly that almost no one questions them anymore. Exterminatus is just a policy decision. Servitors are furniture. The Golden Throne's daily sacrifice is the price of doing business. Space Marine recruitment is an honor. Archoflagellation is justice. The Inquisition's absolute power is necessary oversight. Xenocide is religious duty. These aren't seen as crimes at all. They're just how things are done, how they've always been done, how they must continue to be done if humanity is to survive. But consider what humanity has become in the name of survival. The Imperium is the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. And this isn't hyperbole, it's their own description of themselves. They've created a civilization where human life has no value beyond its utility to the state, where mercy is weakness and cruelty is virtue, where every problem is solved through violence and every solution involves the destruction of human potential. Is this really what survival looks like? Is this version of humanity even worth preserving? The tragedy is that the Imperium's crimes create the very problems they're meant to solve. Planetary genocide breeds desperation that feeds chaos corruption. The servitor program creates resentment that fuels rebellion. The Golden Throne's sacrifice makes psychers flee from imperial authorities. Child soldiers and brutal recruitment create Space Marine chapters that sometimes turn renegade. Torture by the Inquisition drives innocent people to actual heresy out of desperation or revenge. Universal xenocide creates enemies where none existed and prevents alliances that could strengthen humanity. The Imperium has created a self-perpetuating cycle where its crimes generate the threats that justify more crimes, on and on in an endless spiral toward extinction. What's most damning is that alternatives exist. Other factions in the Warhammer 40k universe face similar threats without resorting to the same level of systematic atrocity. The Tau incorporate multiple species into their empire and handle psychers without mass sacrifice. The Eldar, for all their flaws, maintain their civilization without turning their own people into slaves. Even some human factions on the fringes of the Imperium manage to survive without the full apparatus of imperial oppression. The Imperium's methods aren't the only way. They're just the way that has become so entrenched, so dogmatic, so wrapped up in religious doctrine and institutional inertia that change is impossible. The Emperor himself, if he could speak, would likely be horrified by what the Imperium has become. Before the heresy, he championed reason over superstition, progress over tradition, and the potential of humanity over blind obedience. The current Imperium represents the failure of everything he tried to build. It worships him as a god, despite his explicit orders not to. It has stagnated technologically rather than progressing. It operates on superstition and dogma rather than reason. It destroys human potential rather than cultivating it. The Imperium hasn't preserved the Emperor's vision. It has perverted it into its exact opposite. And the future looks even darker. The Golden Throne is failing, and no one knows how to fix it. The Great Rift has split the Imperium in two, cutting off half of their territory from Terra. New threats emerge constantly. The rise of chaos under Abaddon, the awakening Necrons, the arriving Tyrannid hive fleets, the expanding Tau Empire. The Imperium's response to these mounting threats is more of the same. More exterminators, more servitors, more sacrifice, more torture, more xenocide. They're doubling down on policies that haven't worked for 10,000 years, hoping that somehow quantity of suffering will overcome the fundamental rot at the heart of their civilization. This is the ultimate crime of the Imperium, not any single atrocity, but the system that perpetuates all of them. It's an empire that has made cruelty into policy, oppression into doctrine, and the destruction of its own people into standard operating procedure. It's a civilization that has forgotten why it's fighting, lost sight of what it's defending, and now exists only to continue existing, no matter the cost in human lives and human souls. The Imperium of Man is humanity's greatest accomplishment and its greatest shame, a testament to both our capacity for resilience and our capacity for creating systems of institutionalized suffering. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this dark journey through the Imperium's crimes. These aren't comfortable topics, and presenting them requires confronting some genuinely disturbing aspects of the Warhammer 40k universe. But understanding these crimes is important for appreciating the full scope of the setting's grimdark nature. The Imperium isn't just grimdark because there's a lot of war. It's grimdark because the supposed defenders of humanity have become something just as monstrous as the threats they face. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the darkness at the heart of the Imperium, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We explore the lore, the implications, and the disturbing truths of the Warhammer 40k universe, always striving to go deeper than surface-level summaries. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think any of the Imperium's crimes are justified? Is there any way back from the darkness they've descended into? Or is the Imperium doomed to continue its spiral until it finally collapses under the weight of its own cruelty? Thanks for watching, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future there is only war, and the Imperium has made sure of it.